to do a more fulsome intro.
Awesome. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us this afternoon or this morning. Still morning time, Monday, post Super Bowl. So, my name is Jim Doxtdator. I'm Wolf Clan, Cayuga Nation. I'm Haudenosaunee from Six Nations, and I'm a mediator. I do child protection mediation, I do family mediation, and I do something called restorative practices, which is conflict resolution in a way where we're trying to set the harmed and the harmer free. So so this is the approach that I'm looking at today is a restorative approach. I'm also a Reiki practitioner and a farmer. So those two things. So that's me. Before we get going, I'd like to talk about this. This is like us meeting right here, right? The first time we're meeting and how do we meet? And I use the analogy of what's called the edge of the woods ceremony, where if you came to my Haudenosaunee ceremony 400 years ago, you would have known the protocol to stop at the edge of the woods, build a fire, and wait for someone to come see you. And they're going to come up and see you because they're going to come up and see you. They want to know something. They want to know, how's your good mind? Skeno gay. That's what they're going to say, right? And in that, visitors to a community should be announced and welcomed. And I want you to think about this when, you're dealing with Indigenous communities and dealing with Indigenous people. There's a protocol to happen when you go into the communities. And then often you're going to announce yourself. You're going to make your way through either the band rep program, through the chief and council, through some kind of social service program. But to have that formalized in a way so people know what you're doing there is really important. Customary for visitors to stop at the edge of the woods community, explain their purpose of coming. Visitors show respect by pausing at the edge of the woods and are welcome into the community. And I'm going to go back to the very first time we probably did this with non-Indigenous people, middle of the 1400s. The Dutch would have came up and over the hill, and we would have sent somebody up there to say, "Hey, go find out what they want." And in that interaction a long time ago, we made a connection, and that connection lasted 350, almost 400 years of agreement, and that's called the two-row wampum. So let's like to start with these words. This is one of my mentors, Dr. Rick Hill. Dr. Rick Hill and Dr. Bob Anton Cat wrote something called the Indigenous Dispute Resolution Model. And what the intent of that was to give us a guideline or give us some structure on dealing with Indigenous families and children in the criminal justice system and the child protection justice system, or any time there's trouble and a way to deal with it. But he used this quote, which I like to start out with, and it says, "We need to wipe our tears from the stains of the past so we may see each other as equals for once and for all." And I know this particular guy, and I'm asking, what does that mean? Why do you say that? And essentially, what he's saying, he said this at a convocation, and it was his message out like this, saying, as Indigenous people, dominant society knows what we're dealing with. It's been in the news, it's been widely publicized, we talk about it. We're healing, right? We're healing from an oppression that has gone on for a long period of time and has had detrimental effects on us. And we're being open about that. Now, to look at the relationships and to really respect what we're doing, what he's saying is that dominant society has to wipe its own tears, own stains from the tears of the past. And what he's really saying there is that if you're not Indigenous, then you're colonized. So everybody in the screen is colonized. And to question what happened to your family there, right? What happened? And why did they come here? And when they came here, how was it for them? How did they get treated? And how has that been over a long period of time? How many people made it? How many people didn't? And once you start addressing those issues and looking at life in that same way, one day we'll see each other as equals. And in healing, we'll see each other as equals. And that's kind of where I'm coming from, this place right here, where there is no better or worse. It's just in awareness. And that's really where we want people to be, in a good mind. So the objectives for today. So we're going to guide participants on best practices and approaches to engaging dispute resolution with Indigenous people. integrating this perspective into your practice as child protection professionals. So we're going to take a look at the Indigenous people within settler systems of justice, and I'm walking through a little bit of this kind of pre information about prior to the practice, so that we have the same understanding. You know, there's a term we use as Haudenosaunee. It's we're of one mind. We're all of one mind of this. We all understand it the same way, and that's kind of where I'm coming from this. So to understand, again, where Indigenous people are at. So there's no singular Indigenous culture. There are many distinct cultures within some common characteristics, and that's really important to understand. Myself as a Haudenosaunee person is different than somebody that's Anishinaabe, right? We have different practices, different ways of going about it. We're very similar in a lot of ways. We are brothers and sisters, but we are different too, and that's acknowledged in a lot. And just an example of that, one of my Anishinaabe brothers I was doing some work with one time, or about to do some work, he said, I don't know that we can work together. I said, well, why do you think that? He says, well, as Anishinaabe, we go in counterclockwise way, right? And I'm like, I get you. And as Haudenosaunee, pardon me, the opposite. We go in counterclockwise, they go in clockwise. And I'm like, sat there for a second. I thought, though, we'll both meet at noon and we'll both meet at 6. So there is a lot of similarities in what we're trying to do. And to understand that is really the to make association and really understand folks. There's 3 Indigenous peoples recognized in Canadian Constitution of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. Within each group, unique nations, groups of people with their own culture, language, and histories. And meeting people where they're at. So understanding that the Canadian systems of justice are colonial systems imposed upon Indigenous people. So when you see Indigenous folks inside that system and they're acting untoward, or they're angry, or they're frustrated, have some understanding that that was a direct system built to oppose them, right? To oppose. And that opposition is felt right inside that courtroom, right? It's felt right inside that meeting with the Crown. It's felt right inside that meeting with, Children's Aid Society sometimes. And you'll see a big reaction, one that you might not think, but understand that over a long period of time, that oppression has taken its toll. Oftentimes, these systems interfere with traditional Indigenous norms and values. Quite simply put, Indigenous norms and values are a restorative approach. The Canadian justice system is a punitive approach. That is that simple, right? Either we're helping to be restorative and fix things, or we're still being punitive. And there is no two ways about those two ways. It's either you are or you're not, in one or the other. Even if the practices are well intended, the systems can lack cultural nuance and ultimately discriminate against and isolate Indigenous peoples participating in them. And we have to watch for that. As a practitioner, you're watching for fairness. You're watching to make sure people's voices are being heard. And this is a tricky thing, because sometimes you're dealing with a person that is upset, and you have to be that calming voice for them sometimes. So what are Indigenous people carrying? We know residential schools and 60 scoop. Those things are huge in the world. Myself, I'm the first person in 5 generations not to be in residential school. Everybody was there before me. And, I didn't know the effects of that till I was probably like 37, 38 years old in my life. And then once you start healing it, that wound, you really start seeing how substantial that is and how widespread it is. I grew up around all residential school survivors, but they didn't even know they're residential school survivors, right? No one had that language wasn't being talked about. They were just surviving. That's what those folks were doing, right? And as a child, and the rest of the kids growing up in it, we're subject to that. And the 60 scoop, the 60 scoop folks, it is such a phenomenon that you didn't even know anything was wrong for so long, up until you tried to do outside of where you were raised, right? If you were raised in the 60s scoop scenario where it was, you're in a nuclear family inside of a small town, predominantly white, you would really have no idea of identity. And the fear of 60 Scoop folks to reach out to that Indigenous community is great, right? They feel rejected without even having actually formally been rejected, right? So the trek getting in is really big. And in this situation, I really find helpful, and I deal in the London and Kitchener areas mostly. There's two organizations up there, Healing of the Seventh Generation and at Losha. Those organizations are excellent organizations to connect folks with their culture, just to give them that friendly place to be. We deal with child welfare, racism, dislocation, dispossession of land, family history that, just like I had mentioned, being the first person in so many generations not to be in a residential school. Those are big family history things that are important. Loss of spiritual, cultural identification. Just simply not knowing who you are is part of the crime. That, not knowing that you're Haudenosaunee, right? Not knowing your clan, not knowing the ways of being, how to settle your mind, how to take care of yourself in that traditional way. These are huge things that, they're at the basics of being Haudenosaunee. That's who you are. We often look at ceremonies and regalia and all the food and think that's what ceremony, that's what being Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe is. Part of it, but the major part of it is how you carry yourself and how you think. And we as Haudenosaunee, we say you're thinking with a good mind, right? And I'll get into that a little bit later about what that good mind is, but essentially it's free of anger, fear, negativity, anything that you have a responsibility to clear from your mind. So that when you're talking to people, you're only in a good mind. Um, Again, education, people are living in poverty. Poverty rates are huge. Disability and chronic health issues. This is coming from years and years and years of oppression, right? Years and years of oppression bring untold health concerns, right? Hypertension, heart disease, anxiety, like it goes and goes and goes and it grows. Um, then we find people finding comfort in gangs. That's the family they never had right there, right? They'll take care of them. They'll look out for them. And often as a mediator, I've been in a spot where that's what you're up against. That family, and you have to negotiate it with them about what's going to happen in this person's life. And the legal system and addictions. These are all things that Indigenous people are carrying, and it's heavy. And it's called, there's a term we use, intergenerational trauma. Intergenerational trauma is simply just trauma that has been experienced over generation over generation, and no one said anything. No one has done anything. It has just happened. And what you get is layers of trauma. The complex forms of trauma, generational trauma, they come in layers, and in the sense where they happened, then time passed, then something else happened, time passed, and all of those feelings will be layered on top of each other as time goes on. And when you start healing, you will find the healing comes in layers as well. You start releasing the things that are more recent in the mind, and you'll get back to the things that you've blocked out eventually. But to know they do come in they do come in waves, they come in layers, and it goes over time. That you're dealing with this. More experiences of racism, education, medical system, policing, courts, incarceration. Know that inside the medical system, for instance, there is a term that's used. It's called white coat syndrome. White coat syndrome is a syndrome meaning from folks that they're afraid to go inside that system. They're afraid to go in, that you don't think that your needs are going to be met. Someone's going to be looking at you in the light they should be looking at you, and helping you with the spirit that you're looking to be helped. Folks like my grandma. My grandma passed away from COPD when she was 92. She avoided the doctors. 35, 40 years of her life. Right? She avoided doctors. She just avoided it. She just lived through it. She smoked, she drank, She would not go to the doctors. She was hard, like it was a long-term thought of that. And in all fairness to her, she had 10 children that they took every single one of those kids inside that hospital, right? So that's her experience. So to go back for something else is too dangerous. We talk about missing and murdered Indigenous women. Indigenous women have been indiscriminately murdered and have gone missing for centuries without justice. And equal to that, missing and murdered Indigenous men have also gone murdered. And in Canada, and these rates aren't exact, but I know they're the ballpark that the rate of murdered and missing Indigenous women is 4 or 5 times higher than it is for dominant society women. To know that missing and murdered Indigenous men is 5 times as high as all of those. It is a dangerous, dangerous thing to be an Indigenous man inside of Canada in this day in a colonized nation. Intergenerational trauma leads to lateral violence, the effects of colonialism internalized and expressed upon other members of the community. This lateral violence is huge, right? It is a huge thing. It is my family doesn't think that your family should get any more. And we are going to go tell some people whatever we have to tell them so that they are influenced by that and you feel the effects of it without me actually having to do anything, right? And the lateral violence goes on all over the place. My work in communities is 100% around lateral violence that happens in the workplace. People will intimidate, people will yell and scream at each other to maneuver. These are things we've learned that we have to unlearn. Let's see. So we all have a shared history and endure the effects of colonization. One of the things that I spoke on the upfront about Dr. Bob Anton Cat and Dr. Rick Hill writing this the Indigenous Dispute Resolution Model. They defined in there something called ethnostress, right? So ethnostress is the result of the disruption of the joyful feeling of being an Indigenous person. As a result of colonization, our people have often become fearful, angry, restless, not connected to the stabilizing influences of traditional culture. And to understand that ethnostress and to understand a long period of time. So imagine, again, I talked about the first contact around the middle of the 1400s. My grandmother would have tapped me and said, go see what those folks wanted. There would have been people standing at the top of that hill that didn't look like us and send me. So I run up there, and my job is really to find out if they have a good mind. Do you have a good mind? I say to them, scano gay, right? Because if there's going to be a big fight, it might as well be at the top of the hill. It can't be in the village, right? But we're going to find out. And in there somewhere, we didn't speak the same language, but somehow we made connection. We made connection, we made understanding. And that was the beginning of what they call the two-row wampum. It went on for 350, 400, still going on today, but it was relevant. And in those interactions, that's all sounds great that we made good connection, that we continued on. But back in the village, something happened. And you can imagine if you all sent me up to the top of the hill to talk, and I came back down and I said, everything's okay, they're okay. I'm going to just say, in all respect to most of you wouldn't believe me, right? Until you saw it yourself, until you talked to it yourself. So that natural worry start creating and going that wasn't there before, right? We knew the dangers of going out in the world. Now there's a new danger and it's ever present. And over time, that ethno-stress proved to be correct because they believed they knew bad was coming. And what came? Land dispossession, policies around citizenship, 60 school residential schools, all sorts of things came. So that worry and that concern has rained down on Indigenous communities over time. And that's the effect. So any Indigenous person never tells me that they're not affected by this. They're not affected by colonization. I respectfully tell them they're wrong. They're wrong, and they have to take a hard, long look at it. What this is. So getting into the principles of IDR. what makes it distinctive? So it's culturally appropriate, right? Indigenous cultures, interventions are more important than mainstream interventions. I use the words of Dr. Bob Anton Cat here, because what he's looking at is this. Then he's saying that a culturally appropriate intervention, right, is greater, and he's saying than mainstream intervention. And when I look at the two, right, one is an interest-based intervention, and that is the mainstream intervention, right? It's interest-based. It's there's interest going on. People want you to be up at a place. They're asking you to kind of maneuver to that place and just be there, right? That doesn't work when you have folks that are traumatized. It simply doesn't work. The whole thing needs to be a negotiation. It's a mediation, and to the culturally appropriate thing in opposed to the interest based is to look at it in a restorative way. And to look at it in a restorative way, I need to hear the whole story, not just maybe of your lifetime, but tell me about the last 7 generations of your family. What has gone on in your family? And just tell me the stories, and we'll come to a place where we'll understand that. Um, and in there, that's where the healing is. And the healing is the change in behavior that we're looking for, right? That's what's going to bring the change in behavior, change in thoughts, change in the way they do their life. There's a recognition of Indigenous rights. The rights of Indigenous child or person cannot be diminished, abrogated, or otherwise limited. And that's very important. Because you will get in some situations some folks that they went through the 60 Scoop program, and they want to deny their indigeneity, right? And everyone has a right to do that. But here's the problem, that as you move through that system and we start talking about what your problem is, and we understand you're indigenous, and we understand we associate these problems that have gone on, that it gets there's nowhere to run inside of that moment, because you have to deal with what has happened, right? You have to deal with it. Talk about it, expand out what it means. It doesn't mean that they have to go over and be full out indigenous. What you're doing is you're talking about their indigenous problems, how they come about. Now, solutions, that's where culture meets dominant society right there. You can either take pills or you can go for holistic treatments, right? Both are available, and this depends on the individual where they sit. But whatever's going to make improvement, whatever's possible is the priority there, because they have to get out of the place they're at. They're in a bad place. This is what the issue is. Right to well-being. Every Indigenous person has the right to be in an environment culturally safety and cultural safety and spiritual well-being. Free prior informed consent. Indigenous families are experts on themselves and are essential to planning and decision making. Therefore, no actions will be taken without their free prior informed consent. And when we talk about families, um, families will go do what they're going to go do, but they need coaxing and they need some help doing that, right? And it's got to be sometimes on a really gentle way. It might be substantial, like they all agreed, or people agree to go to a healing lodge, people agree to take treatment, whatever it's going to be. But you got to understand those dynamics of that family, that if one person breaks away, the rest of them are going to try to drag them back. So to negotiate out with the family that everybody's going to get help is substantial. And that's their free prior informed consent to say, yes, we understand what the problem is, and we will move forward in this way. It'll be a lot less fighting than if we force people to do things. Family supports. Indigenous families have many strengths, resources to solve their problems within their families. To really dig into when you're doing, say, ODR or IDR, to ask about family members that can help with healing, help with understanding, help. It isn't just the help with the logistics, it is the family support in there, because somebody in their family has gone through the healing process, and they will be very valuable to this. They'll give a perspective that isn't there right now, that's not getting a voice. Family and friends, Indigenous family and friend members are a valuable resource as well. And for the same reasons that I just said about the family member that went through healing or is knowledgeable about their language or their traditions or their ceremonies. These are very, very important things because they can represent a big shift in a moment. That moment can represent this big shift that we're looking for to happen. So key elements of IDR, again, to develop the good mind, develop and exercise or remind participants to keep the good mind judgment-free, fair to all, and open-minded. And that is the system. That is the way to go. Because as soon as we allow people to use their anger, to use their, intimidation, whatever it's going to be, we lose. So we're losing out in the moment. It doesn't work anymore. This whole mediation really requires people to say the words that are on their mind in this calm way. And that's where we're going to get to the bottom of it when people hear sincerity. And this is where we're really helping people develop that good mind. So when they do speak out, you say something to them, right? Amanda?
Hi, Jim. I'm so sorry to interrupt. I am just hearing from a few folks, and I see it on my end. The slides are showing quite blurry.
Oh,
So
okay.
I'm not sure why. Yeah, we want to just try to share it again. If not, I wonder if not in the PowerPoint, the
Does that
presentation
go?
mode. No, it's like every few, but the last two, the smaller print is quite blurred.
I'll tell you what, everyone. I'll send these out to everyone, and
Okay.
everyone will have them after. So yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No, that's
Yeah.
okay. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah. It's okay. So again, the key elements of IDR, we talked about developing the good mind, no projection, right? This is you. This is you sitting in this chair. Remember not to project your personal needs onto the process, right? And that goes from a place where if you haven't done any healing to the place of you've done a great deal of healing. Both places can be projecting. You're projecting onto it. I've done a great deal of healing in my life. I'm in a constant state of healing and growth in my life, right? Um, I think it's second nature. I think it's something that just happens. I think it just goes on in one's life. I'm okay with it. I'm open about it. I got to recognize, and I do recognize that some people, this is the most scariest thing in the whole wide world they could ever talk about, right there. And me talking about it so casually, I have to watch that language sometimes. So I'm not projecting onto them. Oh, why don't you just go heal? Just go to the healing lodge. No, it was a big deal, right? So instead, you're saying, boy, I know this is a big decision. What is it you need to make that decision, type of thing? Be discerning. Be able to sort out judgment from fact. This peace building exercise here isn't passivity, right? It isn't being passive. Someone sits down and says, "This is my story," and you go, "Oh, okay, well, we all know stories, right? I tell you a fish story, and it's a big fish, and it's a little too big that you could remember, and you can call me on that fish story a bit. Go, well, I haven't seen that fish that big before. You sure you caught it in this lake? Like there's a story to things. And at a point in time, you don't forget you're getting the other side story too. And we're trying to bring people into a place where it's like, I'm not going to call you a liar, but I'm going to tell you that story out there is probably not going to wash. How will you help me out to understand deeper what you're really trying to say? Right. So there's a lot of unpacking in being discerning. Objectivity. Keep yourself objective and remain neutral. That's the task all of us have on a daily basis, to do that because it's a very difficult thing. People yell at you. Well, what's gone on here?
I'm just going to
Is
share
that you? Did
it,
you do?
Jim. Yep. This way,
Okay,
I
good.
think it
Okay,
might be your bandwidth. There you go.
fair enough. Fair enough. So keep yourself objective, and remain neutral. For us, once you get into a groove of it, you're okay with it. But once things start bothering you, right? I imply to pay attention to that. Pay attention, because it isn't them, it's you, right? They're saying something that is bothering you somehow. I don't know what it is. We have to learn to not jump on it, but more be with it in that discerning bit, because the jumping on it will scare it away. Being with it will help them really come to a place. Next slide, please, Amanda. So cultural foundations of IDR. The first step is address issues and concerns in cultural congruent manner. And, very simply put, again, it's a restorative process. That is talking about the past, talking about all that's happened, helping them understand what's all that's happened and why it's happened. We know about history. We know, if you don't know about a community's history, say you're working with a specific community or bunch of communities, read up on their communities, right? Just an example. For example, I did some work not too long ago up at Michipicoten First Nation, right? Lovely people. There, we had a really good training session up there, and I was reading about all their community. They have had land dispossession 3 times. Their community has been moved since like 1913, right? And it's just moved and moved and moved. And what that does to them um, is a really, really hard thing. It breaks them up. It separates them. It confuses things, right? So just to understand people, the history of what that is the culturally congruent way. That's the way of understanding it. You just understand it in a bigger way, maybe than they do even, right? The next is hear and understand concerns, and genuinely hear and understand concerns. Empathize with them, right? People tell you a horrific story. It's okay to say, wow, that must have been a lot. That's okay to say that. That must have been horrible. Tell me more about that. Talk about it, because you might be the first person to hear them out, to hear that trauma, and show it's safe enough to let that go, to let that out, right? You might be the first one, and that's okay, right? Next slide, please. Next is create a well-being plan. So in a well-being plan, you're concerned about, where's Johnny or Susie going to be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, right? Who's going to take care of them? We're looking at education. We're looking at their health. We're looking at uh, their culture, and we're looking at, I just lost my mind for a second. And their activities, whatever activities they're in, how their life is, right? You're building it up all around there. And in that, if there's treatment going to be involved, if there's healing lodges going to be involved, if there is different concerns that are bigger than not. Some folks, have fetal alcohol syndrome, whatever they have, FSD. We have to, you're building into it. And again, you're working with organizations like Losha or Healing of the Seventh Generation. They're well versed. They're well versed in what people are needing in their well-being, in their well-being plans, right? They're well versed in it. This is what they're doing on a regular basis. They're helping people get housing. They're helping people with their mental health. There's group work that is going on there. There's job counseling and education that are being helped with. So to get that person into that mode, where they're working with an organization, and people are, that's probably the first time in their life people have genuinely been interested in helping lift them up, right? And to know that they'll take steps back in that process, and to acknowledge that. Don't shame them on it. Say, yeah, I could see why you'd step back. It'd be a lot. And if you never had anybody help you ever before, say they never helped you your whole life, right? And you struggled and struggled and struggled. On this day, I show up and I go, here, I'm here to help. I don't expect you to trust me. I don't expect that at all. Like, you don't expect me. I don't expect that. I'll say, I don't expect you to trust me, but let's take some time here to talk about it, and you can see what it's about, what I'm talking about. Kind of letting them, pulling back the curtain, say, look, at my job is to help you understand all these other services and these things going on, and I want to get you into that so you're actually doing the work. And really, at that point in time, we are kind of demystifying the whole thing, because they're saying we get people all the time in a bad way. This is where we go. This is where they go to get better, to do what they have to do. The next is that it says keep the meeting clear of human service providers. I leave this here because it's important, and it inside the IDR process. One of the key things is that if the Children's Aid Society workers or any other workers, sometimes we kept clear of those talks. So if I'm talking to you and your family about the horrific traumas you've gone through, your mom in a residential school program, you got the 60 scoop, all these things that have gone on, right? That in itself can be a private conversation with myself and yourself. And what we're bringing from there is the well-being plan over to the service providers after we do this. And in not all situations, and I want to just talk about this for a second. This, I probably had this slide for about 3 years now, right? 3 years ago, there was big fights on who could be in, who couldn't be in, right? There was big fights. A couple of years ago, different societies out there in the world made decisions to say, you know what, we are going to pull ourselves out before you even tell us to leave, because we're recognizing me being in the room is a bit of an issue, right? And so now what we have is that combination of those workers that when we're having the discussion about what's going to go on, they will say, I don't think it's great. I'm in the room. The society's been in a fight with these folks for a while. You will be the person in between to help us work that out, right? And in that, I take that, and it's not a matter of just going to be excluded. No, I'm really trying to bring that person and the worker together in some way to humanize it a little bit, right? Because the person under watch, if you will, looks at the worker more often than not like there's this evil person that just bad, and they just all this stuff. And I don't want that to be the experience. I want them to understand that that one person just happened to catch them inside of their trauma. And that's why I'm here, right? That's the purpose why I'm here. And to help bridge that out, to realize this is just moments of time. It isn't planned and it isn't personal. And this helps really bridge gaps. It helps later on in life when they go through life, if they have to contact the society just to have a talk, to have resources, because the children then start acting up after that. You get the parent right. Now the children start acting up and kind of going in their way. You need to have them, give them some resources and some ways of being to say, look, you can call the society. You can call them and talk to them, right? And more often than not, that's the connections I made. Next slide, please. And then again, you present and advocate the person's well-being plan to the governing body, right? You're in a lot of times what's happening is we negotiate it out in private. I bring it to the folks and say, this is our plan, this is what we're gonna go do, right? And then we see if we can come for another circle sometimes. Once the shock and awe of everything's worn off, if you will, right? People can sink into it. People know names of programs they're going to, what they're actually going to do. This is the goal to it, to settle it right down so that when we leave here, everyone's like, wow, that was a lot. I didn't realize, so much had gone on, and my enemy isn't you, right? And really that's the key. Because once you start collecting enemies along the way of this process, you distract from the main problem, which is you and your trauma. If I'm leaning or fighting with some person I've just met, it's not going to get me to where I want to go. And move forward as a team in the best interest of the person, of the child, of the family. That's a plan they put together. It's a plan they agreed to. They said, yeah, I'll go do the work. I'll watch my behavior. I gotta get, drug testing, drug addictions, whatever it is they have to do. This is the first time it's all out in front of them. And other people know. There's support people if they have them know, right? And what one knows, we all know. And now our minds are one. And we're leaving that place with our minds are one. We know what the problem is. We know what has caused this. And we know what support we all are due inside this process. So next slide, please. So the expected outcomes and benefits, more effective and customized use of community and local resources, cultural resources, because you're hearing the story and you're hearing directly what their problem is. And as workers here, we're listening to what you need, right? You're telling me a story, and I hear, oh wow, a therapist. I know a therapist. You need that. We're listening for that need. To have people experience a more culturally aware and equitable process in regard to their conflict, shift to developing more positive relationships between individuals, families, and with dominant society. And I think that's really important to really talk about just for a second about that more positive relationship with dominant society. A lot of Indigenous folks don't feel part of society. They don't feel part of it, right? They don't feel to go to the places we all go to, if you will. If it's just out for dinner on a Saturday night in a nice restaurant in town, to the village square when everybody's gathered to celebrate fireworks. I don't know what, but just that barrier there is a thing. So I help people understand that it isn't dominant society that made you mad. It is the thing that set up dominant society, right? You're still allowed there. You're always allowed there, right? And it's difficult because you have to learn how to be there. If you've been mad at it for so long, being mad at it longer is not going to get you there. And I help people understand that part of your healing is to heal back into community, right? It isn't just dominant society. It is dominant society can be inside the First Nation community itself because there's a dominance inside of a community and people don't feel a part of it. So to help people understand that there's part of your behavior that goes on, but also managing other people's behavior is part of your healing. People experience empowerment. Did I read that? Yeah, I did that. Next, please. So putting up next, yeah. So putting into practice and just some understanding. So punishment rarely has a desired effect. Most often it creates a whole new set of problems, right? So we have to think about that in anything that looks punitive. And to understand that that has such a negative effect on that person that we might have to compensate for it. We might have to talk about it more, or try to help them understand what that is. Next slide, please. So again, adjusting our lenses. So I want you to think about, non-restorative, right? So harm happened, a rule's broken, right? What's the response? Blame, punishment, and pain. That's what they want, right? You go to court, they say guilty. The judge says you're going to do this, go in jail for this much time, pay this much fine, not drive for this long, never go here. That's punishment, right? The justice just seeks to prove right and wrong, right? That's it, achieved through guilt and punishment. No one cares why you did that. No one cares what the reasons were. You're guilty and now you can't, right? And there's limited acceptance into school, family, community, because everybody knows what you did, right? Everyone knows that you're the bad one, and here we are, and that's it, right? So after adjusting our lenses, people are hurt, relationships are damaged. The response is needs created by harm, to making things right. We got to look at the harm being caused, and how are we going to make things right here? How are we going to clean up the milk? How are we going to just make this thing go forward? And the justice is sought through understanding, talk, and reparations, achievement through responsibility, needs being met, healing in relationships. Essentially, trying to make sure that this never happens ever again, right? This bad things happened and it's never going to happen again. And that maximizes full chances into acceptance. If anyone here has ever made a huge mistake, they apologize to that, right? You said, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. And you saw where people did accept you back in, right? Not everyone, that's fine, but some people did. I saw the mistake, right? I saw it. You stepped up, you said you're sorry, you apologized, you might have paid for the broken window, whatever it is, you did what you had to do. That's the hardest road, but it's the best road, right? It's the hardest road. The easiest road is just to turn around and not say nothing and just carry on. Next slide. So being restorative versus being punitive in your work life, home life, and in and out of the community. This is what transforms communities, right? This is what it is. Focus on strength, focus on weakness, critical and being critical, being open versus being closed as a person. Are you approachable, right? That's the key. Like when that person turns on the screen, right? Or you go sit in that office with them, do you look approachable? Do you look like the kind of person I want to let go my family's history on? Like, do you look safe enough to do that? That's something to think about for all of us. Um, do you look to repair harm or do you look to continue cause harm? Right? Next. Next slide. So when we're helping folks along the way in our mediation, we're dealing with this thing right here, this healing path, and it's verily a straight line. We find people in their normal, right? They're functioning but not living, right? They're in trouble. There's something's happened. This is where we find people. And when we talk it through, they will be in shock and denial, right? Who thinks here that they're sitting in another state that is making you unaware? None of us think that, right? And none of us know that until somebody brings that to our attention. And that's when we start acting out of community. That's when it happens. So the shock and denial of that, then anger, because you realize somebody did something to you, and now here's the results, and you're just sitting there with an egg on your face. You're type of thing. It brings depression and detachment. You feel violated in a lot of ways that no one did anything right about it, and you start seeing the way out, and the way out is through dialogue and bargaining. The first talk can be with the mediator, just to hear that it's not your fault. Those are words that I say 3 4 times a week to people. It's not your fault. When you hear a big story about something that's happened and they've lived all their life through it, and it happened way back here as a little kid, it is not their fault. And it just kept on happening and happening and happening and happening and happening. And while they dialogue and bargaining, they accept it, right? Sometimes we can just accept that that bad thing has happened, that thing has gone on. All right, here I am, right? And you start right from there. And that's where you start returning to a meaningful life and creating what life you want, who you want in it, how you want it, how it's going to be. Next, please. Just next, I'll get to the questions if you could. So, what is a good mind? Oh, yeah, that's good. Yeah, thank you. We're running short on time, I see. So we get down to these questions. I use these formal questions as a ways to an end, right? As a means to an end. That's we want to look at these questions. They're open-ended, right? But we also have some information about people in the background. So if I'm sitting here asking you, what happened, Amanda? What happened, right? I got some other information about Amanda around, right? But I'm going to listen to her first about her what happened, because that is substantial in that way. And we're teasing it out now. Go, well, tell me more about this. And what I got here is written here is this type of thing. And we're just really getting what happened, right? And we're staying away from kind of like, what did you do? Why did you do that? This isn't a blame exercise. This is just get it out, what happened, right? Yeah, I picked up the rock, I threw it through the window and it broke, right? Man, oh man. And next question is, what were you thinking at the time, right? And there's a lot of unpacking that can go on that. I was so mad at the time. I was so angry. I was so hurt. I was so, whatever feeling they're having, they'll express it. And I used to do intimate partner violence at John Howard Society. And outside of what happened, when I say to them, what were you thinking at the time? They say, well, what do you mean at the time? I'm like, okay, right when you were in the back of the police cruiser, handcuffs on. Tell me about that moment. Oh my God. And you know, for anybody that's never been in a police cruiser with cuffs on, those are big moments in your life, right? That's what you're thinking about. I don't, you know, I'm sorry I did it. I lost my mind. I'm always mad. They'll tell you it, right? What have you thought about since? And it's a reflection piece. Like, do you have a conscience, right, about this? You know, and essentially what we're looking at. You know, some people don't have a conscience, and that's just good to know. It's not, you don't need to be mad at it. You don't need, just know that, because we're going to build a conscience on them. Because we're going to talk about who's all been affected by what's happened in what way, right? And that gives us a chance to go, well, you know, Caitlin, she got hurt. Elizabeth got hurt there too, and I saw Amanda, she got hurt, and at least I'm acknowledging these folks, and I'm saying, like, before I'm like going, I didn't see them at all when I was throwing stuff around, right? I had my blinders on. Now my blinders are off. I'm seeing I hurt these folks. And next question goes down to what needs to be done. What do you think needs to happen to make things right? And that's a golden question that sometimes somebody in their lifetime has never been asked. I've been the first person to ask someone that question many, many times in their life, many, right? And they've never been asked it before because no one ever cared. And this is the process that's helping things reconcile to get to a better place, right? And it's to help somebody make things right in their life. To me, that's a reward. It's a real true reward that you get to do for somebody, right? Next slide. I think that's it. And this is just leaving with this seventh generation mandate, right? So think not solely of the welfare of the current generation, not even of the next. Instead, think of the future welfare of the seventh generation to come, the faces that are coming from within Mother Earth, right? So, at the same time that we're concerned about 7 generations back about the story, we're going to start worrying about 7 generations ahead about the people that are coming. And that's the spot we're going to sit in, right? We're, we're, we're concerned about the past, but we're equally concerned about the front. So thank you. I'll provide all these, and you know, I know there might be questions. We're running short on time, but I provide these slides for anybody that wants to use them anytime. You just give me some credit, and you can use them for anything you want. This particular slide is something called, we call the condolence, right? It's a ceremony that we have that would be done. It can be done at the edge of the woods, right? And when we're asking you how your good mind is, we're seeing about untroubling your good mind. We're going to do that through a couple different ways. We're going to wipe your tears, right? So there's this underside of a dough, which is the softest part of the dough, right? We take that, we wipe your tear ducts, both sides. It will bring on tears if those tear ducts are clogged. The medicine inside of that dough helps with tears flowing, right? The next bit is a little feather from the underside of a plume we use to clean the ears out, right? Because we need to hear each other. To know that when somebody is sitting, say somebody's just sitting in the corner and they died, 1 week, 2 weeks passed, and we find them outside of some other gross things in their ears, you will see that their ears are filling up with dust. That's what's happening, right? Because you're dying, you're deteriorating inside yourself. We find people that are deteriorating inside themselves while they're still living, right? You have shut it off. You have turned off your hearing. So that underside of that plume, that feather, is meant to entice those ears, those to clean that out. Next, we have water, spring water, just to clear your throat down, right? And in that, we're smudging too. We're cleaning the eyes, right? So we can see each other. We're cleaning those ears. This is the condolence, right? The feelings and sensations from these activities will solicit emotion from you, right? They will open you up, and that's what they're designed to do. And they've been doing that for thousands of years, thousands of years. So, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, when Jim, thank you so much. Again, I always appreciate time when I get to hear you teach and learn from you. So thank you so much. We do have just a couple of minutes if there are some questions from the audience. I'll go ahead and stop sharing, and I will also stop the recording.